Okay, so I'm Nicole Stoner. I'm the horticulture educator in Gage County. And when we were looking at GroBigRed stuff, I said, oh, I'm really having a good time starting seeds indoors. And so I'll do that presentation. So I really got this bug probably, I think 2021. I was bored being inside and we weren't doing much after COVID and everything. And I said, I got to do something. And so I decided I was going to start my own tomatoes and peppers inside. And it's been a fun journey, and I've learned every year as I've gone along. So I'll just kind of keep you through what I've been doing. So this I think I maybe had 2 lights to start with. And as I have gotten into this, it has grown, and I think every year I buy a new light. Last year I had to buy this new shelf here because I just ran out of space. But I'm really having a blast with it. So this is the one I have in my home office. And then at work, I decided I was going to start plants for our 4-H kids as well. So I bought this setup, and the whole thing came together. The shelf, the lights, and all of that came all as a package deal. So I've been having so much fun. I've expanded into multiple different areas and lots of lights. Every year I think I buy more. And then, you find different things for the pots and that work better for you. And you really just got to find what works best for you and how you like doing it. But the ideal goal is to get to our beautiful gardens. So it's fun to start these things because I start a pepper plant from a seed and I get to a full pepper that I can eat. And it's something that I really put a lot of heart into, and I really love doing because it's like start to finish. That's all me. And so it's really fun. So this is my home garden, and this one here is a garden we did for a school donation garden. We'll talk, Richard, I see your question on what kinds of lights. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides here, but good question. So it's just fun to get to this point. So supplies, you can purchase your supplies from lots of different locations. I usually do them with my seed order from those seed supply catalogs, but I've also ordered a lot of them for work through like Amazon. But nurseries will have them, garden centers, hardware stores have a lot of options as well. Some of the box stores, of course, and there's just lots of different other, and most of those places are going to have pretty much even the same brands. There's like a couple brands that they're going to have, and you'll find them throughout all of those locations. I don't see that there's a difference between purchasing like from a box store or hardware store versus purchasing from the seed supply catalog, or that. So, you get what you pay for, but you can usually get some pretty good stuff at most of these places. So that's where I purchase my stuff. So when to start? So you need to count backward from when you want to plant in the garden. For vegetable gardens, I always go with Mother's Day. And so I count backwards. So I give myself about 8 weeks for peppers and 6 or 7 for tomatoes. The first year I did tomatoes and peppers at the same time, and I realized that didn't line up. The peppers take just a little bit longer to get growing. They take about 10 to 14 days, I think, to get from when you plant to when they germinate. Tomatoes will pop up 2 days later, 3 days later. So that lag time there is what you want to account for. So I always plant like my peppers and my Brussels sprouts about a week or two before I do my tomatoes. I actually am going to try my hand at verbascum this year. My mom and I really like those. And so I'm actually going to start those soon because those take about 8 to 12 weeks to get to a good size for planting. So the seed packet will tell you how long to plant and basically just count backward so that you are at a good time. You don't want to start too early because you can get really long, leggy plants. And that kind of can happen sometimes with my tomatoes. But starting too late, you'll get things a little bit too small. I had my grandma actually gave me a tomato last year. I don't think she started them quite as early, and it was pretty small when I got it, and I put it in the garden, and I think it didn't make it even a couple of days. So you do want to make sure that you do get a good start on those things. Ooh, cotton seeds. Ooh, that one I might have to look into, Megan, because I'd have to see how long that one takes. So if somebody else knows the answer to that question, you can fill that in. But yeah, so just kind of look at what like I said, the seed packet will tell you that. So when you're selecting your seeds, look at the seeds per packet. So your amount is going to vary depending on the crop. So I was just looking at some seeds this morning for our 4-H projects, and I was looking for the 30 to 50 seeds in the packet range because I don't want to get 500 because that's going to be way too many for a couple of years. So you want to get what you can use in 1 to 2 years. Otherwise, and you want enough to do what you want to do. There are some packets of cucumbers I've purchased before that have about 10 seeds in the packet. And, me and my mom share our seeds. And so you don't get as far with it, but that's okay. You only need a couple of seeds per hill, a couple of hills per garden. So you do pretty well with that, but just pay attention to that when you are purchasing them. Also look at the mature height and width of that crop to determine what you can fit in your garden. I get a little excited when I'm purchasing and planting things and I'm like, "Ooh, these are fun." That's how that goes. And so just make sure that you've got the space in your garden to fit in what you're going to grow. So don't grow 45 tomatoes in a garden that's, 6 foot by 6 foot. That's not going to work. So do pay attention to that, and because you want to make sure that you are spacing them correctly when you plant them in your garden. You don't want to do all this work starting them and then put them in the garden for them to have disease and insect problems because they're planted too close together. The seed depth, it varies from crop to crop. Again, the packet's going to tell you where to go on that. But most of them, they're not very big. They don't need to go real deep. The bigger they are, the deeper they need to go into the soil, basically. But most of my tomatoes and peppers are just a little bit into the soil. So don't go too deep because they won't germinate very well. And then preparing the seed depends on the crop. So some may need to go through a cold treatment or scarification, or they call it that. The cold treatment is the stratification, and the scarification is when you rough up the seed coat. The packet will tell you that most of the time, most of your general garden crops are not going to need to go through that. They're pretty good on their own. And then make sure that you are purchasing fresh seed. So I know sometimes there are seed libraries and they get donated seed from like last year. The age of that seed decreases the germination rate, but those people running the seed library are paying close attention to that, and they know what they're doing, and they're going to get you something that's good. But at the one that is in Beatrice, they go through that every year and pull out the stuff that is no longer, basically has a bad germination rate too late in the seed, too many years later. And then store those extra seeds in a cool, dry location to ensure that they will last from year to year. And so I store mine in my office in that same room that I showed you in the beginning. So it's cool, dry, temperature regulated and all of that, and they stay pretty well there. So the seed viability does depend on the crop. So This is just a guide here. Watermelons will last for about 4 years, tomatoes 4 years. Onions, really only about a year, so they're not going to last real long. So you might see over time that maybe some of your crops just aren't germinating very well. And that's just due to how long they've been around. You can do a germination test with it prior to planting those if you want to see if they're still good. And basically you just take a wet paper towel, put like 10 seeds in there, give them a few days. I think it needs to be in a Ziploc bag. And then after a few days, if you've got 7 or 8 of those that have germinated, then you've got 70 to 80% germination rate. So you're pretty good there. If you do that and only 2 or 3 of them, you only have 20 to 30% germination rate. So you may want to throw those seeds out. So you can always do that if you're unsure. But this is just a general rule of thumb for all of these crops. So this is your common seed packet diagram here. And this kind of just tells you what you're looking for. Common name, the variety, the Latin name, you know, those are always going to be on there. The days. So this is how many days until you get to enjoy the fruit. So how many days from seeding to when you can harvest. It's going to tell you the growth rate, you know, indeterminate, pull type. If it's organic, it'll have this logo on there. It'll show you the disease code. So what resistance that particular species has to different diseases. It might tell you if it's heirloom or not in the tomatoes. And then in the description, you might see just how they're going to grow, how wide or height and let's see, row spacing, seed spacing, seed depth, days to emergence, when to thin them, and then when to start indoors, when to do the planting outside. So all of that stuff's going to be on that seed packet for you. So I talked about indeterminate or determinate on that last picture there. So I wanted to go over that for you. So if you didn't know, determinate tomatoes are your bush tomatoes. They're going to grow to a certain size and produce a certain amount of fruits before they just kind of stop. Determinate is what I use for a cherry tomato because I am the only one in my household that eats the cherry tomatoes. And if I get the indeterminate ones that grow continuously and continuously produce fruit, I'm getting like buckets full of cherry tomatoes daily, right? And I can't eat that many cherry tomatoes as much as I like them. So I like to choose the determinate type because they only produce a certain amount of fruits and it keeps the plant a little bit smaller, a little bit more compact. So it's a little more manageable for me. And I still have plenty that I can donate them. One year I accidentally bought determinate tomatoes for my big tomatoes, and I was concerned that I wouldn't have enough I like to make salsa. And actually they still produced plenty of tomatoes for me. I think I had 4 plants and I had plenty of tomatoes for my salsa. So just know what you want. If you've got maybe a little more limited space in your garden, you may want to go with the determinate type. But if you really, really like tomatoes and like to freeze them and can them and do all of that stuff, you can look at the indeterminate types. Just know which one you're looking for when you purchase them. Then there's also semi-determinate. So it's kind of in between indeterminate and determinate in size. And then there's dwarf indeterminate, which produces shorter, bushier plants like the determinate, but they will produce more fruit continuously like the indeterminate. So keeps a little shorter, but still has lots of fruit for you. So there's a lot of different options to choose from. As for the tomato varieties, so make sure you know what you're looking for there. So there's like the standard type, which are just your nice, baseball sized or so, maybe some a little bit smaller, standard or smooth round. They're smaller than a beefsteak, but larger than a salad type. The beefsteak are those big ones, like the mortgage lifter is one that I've tried in recent years, and I really enjoyed that one. It was very tasty and humongous. So that was fun. Those are ones where you cut it, you make one slice and it covers your whole sandwich for your BLT. The salad types are like your cherry, your grape, your pear types. I will warn you with the pear types, they're delicious, but that when I grew a yellow pear tomato, that one pretty well took over my entire garden that year. It got humongous. So like I said, be aware of what you're growing, because they can take over, and then you have problems with crowding. You have problems with being able to harvest it correctly, disease issues, more insect problems with weeds because you can't get in there to get the mulch in correctly, that kind of stuff. So just do be aware that, and you are giving those plants plenty of space. That year with the yellow pear tomatoes, it actually grew over top of a pepper that I had nearby. So, and it was pretty well bogging that down. So it made it very difficult for me in the garden. And then there's the paste type. Those are your dry flesh, a little bit smaller seed cavities. Those are good for like canning or making into sauces. And I see I have a little bit of a typo here. I think that's supposed to be thick, somewhat dry flesh. Apologize. And then seed selection. So there's heirloom types and there's hybrid types. The heirlooms are the ones that are saved and passed down over time. They're open pollinated. So they're pollinated by wind, rain, insects, and birds. But you often will see a few more problems with insect and diseases because they haven't, these are the old fashioned varieties. So they haven't developed them into the disease resistance that we see today, but they often have a little bit better flavor. Because the new hybrid ones, they are increased vigor, better uniformity, better production, but maybe they've bred a little bit of the flavor out of those. So you take one with the other, I guess. But these are the ones that are going to have the weird shapes, the weird sizes, the weird colors, the unusual characteristics, but better disease resistance. And these ones, you can save the seed for these, but it may not be exactly what you planted the year before. So containers for starting your seeds indoors. So you can use plastic ones, or I like the peat pot ones just because they're biodegradable and you can plant them in the garden if you want to. And they provide really good drainage, kind of built-in drainage. They'll suck up water from the bottom if you need them to do that, but they'll still hold their shape. Make sure though that whatever you're using, that it's clean and sterile. So you can reuse the plastic ones, this type up here in this corner, but just make sure that you sterilize them from one year to the next so that you're putting them in a bleach water solution from year to year. But the peat pots, again, those you're not going to reuse, obviously. They're going to break down pretty well. And then, excuse me, the compressed peat pellets you can use. They're small, so they store really easily. And they can be planted right into the garden, but obviously not going to be reused. And you do want to make sure that you poof those up real good before you plant into them. I use the peat pots. I started the first year, I started them in these plastic trays, and I've just moved to the peat ones just because I like them a little bit better. Just personal preference. You can, these like 2 or 3 inch pots are what I use for the most part. But you can direct sow them like this into like a big plastic pan basically. And then as they get growing, then you will divide these up and put them into their individual containers. Okay, so then you can also use recycled containers, things like paper pots. So like Roundup newspaper, egg cartons work really well. I've seen a lot of people use those for starters, paper towel rolls or folded square paper pots. So like shown in this picture here. But you can use just a lot of different things for this. Last year's plastic containers, if you bought plants at the store, you can use those. Paper or plastic cups, just make sure you poke a hole in the bottom of those for drainage. Same thing with like small yogurt or sour cream or cottage cheese containers. Make sure you get a hole in them, and also make sure that you sanitize those in that bleach water. Milk cartons will work. I even saw like those containers for strawberries or blueberries or other fruits like that in the grocery store would make a good one. Didn't think about that. And this one I never had thought about, but the foil roasting trays for like those lasagna pans or cake pans. And they often have a clear plastic lid so you can create that mini greenhouse environment. Just make sure that you poke a few holes in the bottom of that as well. So there's a lot of different things you can use if you're wanting to save a little bit of money, because the containers do get kind of expensive from year to year. So if you start them in like those big flats or into those really small containers to start off with, you're going to want to transplant those later. So I know like the year that I did those plastic trays, they dried out really fast in those. And so once I moved them into the bigger containers, they did a lot better. I do like to kind of start them in a smaller container and move them to big one. It's probably not necessary, but I like doing that. It's one more task for me along the way. But you don't want to leave them in those really small ones unless you're just going for like a quick start and you're not wanting them to get very big before you put them in the garden. So you can transplant those into those larger pots once they've got at least one set of true leaves. But the small ones, just know that they're not going to hold as much water and they're going to dry out a lot faster. If you planted more than one seed in a container, I usually plant 2 or 3 seeds just to make it safe that I get at least one in there. And then you can tease those plants apart if you want to, or pull off those other ones, thin those out so that there's just one plant per pot. You don't want to have 3 tomatoes growing in one container of that size. So just either pull the ones out or cut them off, or you can very carefully pull them apart and plant them into another container. When you do that transplanting, avoid grabbing them at the stem. You either want to cup them up from below the roots or flip over the container and basically dump the plant out so that you're getting the plant in your hand before you do that. If you just pull up on the stem, you can affect the growing point there for that plant. There are some things that should be direct seeded into small containers. Things like squash, watermelons, cucumbers, and then some flowers like lupine, sweet pea, those kinds of things. If you want to either direct seed those into the garden or into a small container, but you don't want to transplant them and then transplant them again, if that makes sense. So growing media, you want to use a good lightweight soil with really good drainage. You could mix your own with vermiculite, perlite, and peat moss or compost and mix those up. I've used both of these 2 brands here, this Miracle Grow one and the Jiffy. I like the seed starting. It's real lightweight versus like a potting mix. But I learned the hard way. You want to water that down before you plant. So the first time I did it, I was like, okay, I filled all my containers. I'm gonna put my seeds in and I watered it and smoosh, right? So there's a lot of air pockets in those seed starting mixes, which is good. But you want to moisten it up. So I usually, I'll pour it out into a bucket, pour some water in there and mix it up with a trowel and then fill my containers from that. So that way you're actually getting enough soil to sustain the plants as they grow. But really about anything that's a good lightweight soil. If you make your own, there's some really good recipes for that online for making your own soil as well. So yeah. So natural lighting isn't enough, especially during this time of year when we're starting seeds indoors. We don't get the 12 to 16 hours of light per day that we need. So you want to move the lights as the plants grow, and you want it to be about 4 to 6 inches above the plant as they grow. And you don't want the lights to be on continuously. They need sleep, right? They need their nighttime. It's a daylight situation. And so you either want to purchase them with a built-in timer. A lot of the lights nowadays have a built-in timer to them, especially if you're purchasing a grow light. Otherwise, you can purchase one of these here timers. This is what I use with the ones in my office because they don't have a built-in timer. I think this was like $7. So it's not like the timer is going to break you, right? So it's a lot easier to do that than it's mindless. You don't have to think about it. It turns on and off on its own. So this way it helps, if you're late getting home or if you sleep in on a weekend, then your plants are still getting the right amount of sunlight per day. So there are a lot of different options and you can play around with it. You might need to play around with the light you get to determine the intensity because some of them, they can change the intensity of light on there. You can use anything as simple as just a shop light with a cool bulb and a warm bulb. And that'll work. Put that on a timer and just make sure it's hanging from chains that you can adjust it as the plants grow, and you're set. And those can be pretty inexpensive. You would, like I said, you'd want to hang those for ease of movement or purchase those with movable arms. The ones the lights that I got for the office, they had a kind of like a carabiner clip, but like the really difficult tiny ones that are on like a keychain. And I was hurting my finger all the time to move those. And so I purchased little S-shape pieces to hold those lights up so that I can move them a lot more easily. And that was a great purchase for me. I think it was like $2. So, you know, you want to make sure that you can move it really easily. And you're looking at things like, you know, the lumens, on how bright it is. The brightness levels, though, can be adjusted on many of those. So it's not a huge deal. The ones at work are a white light, and my ones at home are either red, blue, or both. And again, you can play around with that with whatever works for your plants, or what you're looking for. But really, if they've got light, the red light is good for bud formation and keeping the plants a little shorter, where the blue light is really good for starting seeds. And then the white light is just a mixed balance bulb. So you should be good with any of those. So these are the ones that I have at home. And these are I just bought them at Amazon and they were pretty inexpensive. There's a couple of them have 3 arms. 1 or 2 of them has 4 arms of the lights. The light intensity is adjustable. The colors are adjustable, and it's got 3 different timer settings in it. So you can find easy things like that. Went too far. So you can see how they just kind of, and it hooks onto my bookshelf, and then I can just kind of Medusa those arms around. They're like Medusa heads, so it works pretty well for my system at home. The ones, and so like I said, it's got a built-in timer. There's white ones that can hang. You can get the multicolored ones or the purple ones that hang like that. I don't have the ones that work here, but the ones that work, I think, no, I can't adjust the intensity. It's just white. It's just one level. And I have to set them on a timer, but they work really well too. So, just find what works for you. Pretty much there's just a lot of options on that. You can go to a lot of different, stores and just find a grow light. You can find it. I've seen them at Menards. I've seen them at Walmart. I've seen them at like a hardware store. So you can purchase them in a lot of different places. Not saying that any work better than the other. I'm not promoting any brands. And then the temperature, you need to keep the temperatures at 70 to 75 degrees during the day. They're best at that, and 60 to 65 at night. There is a heating pad you can purchase if you'd like to keep the soil warmer, and it kind of helps prevent damping off, which I'll talk about here in a minute. And the cool season things are going to like it a little bit cooler than the warm season plants, of course, about 10 degrees cooler. So these are the heating mats you can purchase. I don't use them. I've thought about it. I just haven't. But they can really help. I know when John Porter was here, he did a lot with this seed starting stuff. And he said, especially when getting them started, he suggested putting them on top of the fridge. They don't need the light until they germinate. And it's really warm and kind of humid up there in the fridge, on top of your fridge in your kitchen. So that's a good spot. But otherwise, you know, you can purchase these or not. But I think that mine get a little leggy, and I think this might help with that. So this just shows you some of the soil temperature conditions for vegetable seed germination. So you can see most of them, that ideal temperature is going to be about 60 to 75 or so for most plants for your optimum soil temperatures. But they can go up as, most of them will tolerate up into the 85 to 105 degrees. So you can get it pretty warm if you want, but you don't need to. So watering, you do want the soil to dry up a little bit between waterings. You don't want them to sit in water. You will get damping off. You'll get just root rot, that kind of stuff. So you can do where you put the water in the bottom and let them soak that up, because that's a lot better than watering just right over the top of them. But just make sure that you're careful to not let them sit in the water for too long. Make sure they're soaking up the water that you put in there. You don't want to use water from a water softener. So if you have a water softener, go with the water that's not from the softener. So you may have to go outside to the spigot outside to get water for that. The water softener contains salt, which is bad for your plants, or puts salt into your water, sorry. And then especially when you're first starting those seeds, you want to maintain that humidity. So that's where I use those plastic covers on the top. You can put the tray into a plastic bag with a few holes, or use those clear plastic trays. I spritz them with just a spray bottle, because especially at first, if you try to dump water on them through a watering can, you may move the soil a little bit and then it messes with the seeds in there. So I like to just spritz them for a while. If you need to, if it's really dry in your area, you may need to use a humidifier, or place the seedlings on a tray of gravel. But once they get started, if they're getting to where they're touching the plastic on those trays over top, then you definitely want to pull that clear top off of those. You don't want to leave them in there the whole time. Excuse me. So here's just what I do at home with them. So this is when I first started them. Nothing's coming up yet. They got their little humidity chamber on, the lights on there. They're moist underneath. They're happy. They're going to start moving. I tell you, the best day is when you first start to see those little crooks of the little cotyledons poking up. That's the best. You know you did it right. So it's very exciting. So you can see this is just kind of what I have at work for those humidity chambers. Damping off is a fungal rot that occurs on seedlings started indoors. And so your plants will grow, they'll start doing okay, and then they just kind of whimper out. And so you can see that that does, it'll cause the plants to die. So you want to make sure you're using a soilless mixture to avoid this. You're using clean, sterile pots from year to year, or new ones from year to year, and that you don't overwater those plants. That can lead to this really bad. So maintain that good air circulation, and keeping them warm during that initial germination will also help. But basically, once you get this in there, that container is going to be contaminated. So you'd want to use, if you want to start over, you either sterilize that container good, put in some new soil and try again, or use a fully new container for that. Okay, so for fertilization, you don't need that fertilizer until they've developed their first sets of true leaves, first few. The soilless mixes don't contain a lot of nutrients, so you may need to do this. And you can just fertilize weekly with a quarter strength houseplant fertilizer. So just mix it up in your water and water your plants with it. Once a week should be fine. I would keep an eye on them, you know, if they look like they're doing okay, probably don't need to. If they're maybe looking like they could use something, then you can throw some fertilizer on there. So this is just your ease of transplanting. Things like obviously tomatoes and peppers are really easy to survive that transplanting. So those are really good candidates for it. The things that are not successfully transplanted would be like beans, beets, carrots, and corn. Those things we're going to direct seed. These ones here in the middle, I usually direct seed things like melons, cucumbers, spinach or squash and pumpkins, those kinds of things. But you can transplant, or you can start those ahead of time. They're not going to take very long. I think maybe 4 weeks, if I remember what the seed packet says. I could be off by a little bit, but it's not very long that you would need to start those ahead of planting outside. And you can do that if you want. I just plant them in the garden because, well, as you can see, my growing operation has expanded quite a bit over the past few years, and I don't need to add more to that. So I usually just direct seed those. But you can do those inside, but they're going to be You have to be a little more careful when you're transplanting those than you would with something like a tomato. They're pretty easy to transplant. Tomatoes are. And then don't forget to harden off your plants. So about 2 weeks prior to transplanting, you want to start moving them outside. Don't just place them right out into the wind and right out into the full sun all day. You want to ease them into that. One time when my sister was working at a school, she brought home a tomato that they had grown in their greenhouses, and she gave it to me. And I set it out in front of my house, and it's blocking the wind in this area, and it was kind of shady. But I forgot about it, and I think I went to town that day, and the wind picked up, and I came home and it had snapped right off. So it wasn't exposed slowly enough into those conditions. So at first I'll just do a couple hours, maybe in the evening or something when the wind is dying down, and the sun's not quite as hot, and I'll place them outside for a little bit. And then I'll move them into more sunlight, more wind exposure, and longer periods of time, just gradually over those 2 weeks. And that is just to get them used to the sun is much more intense, especially in the middle of the afternoon in the summer or early spring, than the lights are in your growing location. They also need to be exposed to that wind. I have heard where some people will put a fan blowing on their plants for a while, even when they're indoors. So that way they're start to get used to that wind, and they strengthen up their little stems when they do that. So you just need to get them adapted so that they can live outside in Mother Nature, right? So the only problem with this is that, I showed you I have like 4 lights, right? So I have 4 trays of plants. I got to carry 4 trays outside and 4 trays back in every day, but totally worth it. And then your seedlings are ready to transplant once they get about 4 to 6 inches with a couple 2 to 4 pairs of true leaves. So when I say true leaves, the first sets are those cotyledons, so those don't count. Those are just like what comes out, and those will fall off pretty quickly. So once you start to see the leaves that look like the plant is supposed to look, those are your true leaves. So when they're starting to get bigger, and then just start to harden those off, make sure that you plan where you're going to plant them in the garden. Avoid planting them in the same location each year, and space them properly, water them properly. Because again, you don't want to do all this work starting them to have them die, right? Or not be as productive as you wanted them to be. So this is what you want to get to. This is day 1 of planting, right? So this is right after I planted them all from being inside. So that's always the fun day. And then, so just to recap the steps here, moisten that germination media, fill the trays, write out your labels. You want to do that first because you don't want to plant them all and then go, oh crud, what did I plant here? So write out those labels, knowing how many you're going to plant of each thing. I make myself a nice little guide, write down, I want these of this many of this one, this many of this one. My mom wants this. My stepmom wants this. I write it all out. And then I write out all the labels, and then I just sow the seeds and putting the labels in. Like I said, I do 2 to 3 seeds per cell. And then I take a little bit more of that growing media and just kind of feather it out over top of that so that I make sure I get the seeds to the right depth. Might need to water it again because you need to make sure that is all sticking together so you get good seed to soil contact. Cover those trays with that plastic lid and place them in that warm location to wait for them to germinate. Then just water them as they need throughout that and place them under those grow lights.